Hello, this is the Blast Report podcast on all things blasting. My name is Evan Thibaud with New Wave Consulting, and I want to thank all the drill and blast teams along with those supporting them who are out there on the pattern. The production team at Blast Think and I would like to welcome you to today's episode of the Blast Report podcast. This episode of the Blast Report podcast is brought to you by the Best in the West Conference. The Best in the West Conference regularly hosts over 300 participants to bring mining companies, drill and blast suppliers, and government agencies together to focus on safety, education, and innovation. It is with great pleasure to share this sponsorship opportunity as a thank you to Mr. Walt Partridge from the organizers of the Best in the West. In the last 20 years, they have distributed over $150,000 in scholarships to students from 7 states. As the auctioneer, Walt Partridge has been a crucial part in raising these funds, and we want to take this opportunity to thank you, Walt, not only for your time, but also all of the great laughs. We hope our listeners enjoyed this episode and plan to see you on April 22nd, 2026 at the 37th Annual Best in the West Conference.
Then I left Alaska and I traveled down in western Washington and throughout the U.S. and then I traveled overseas for a long time with Dupont and with ETI when Dupont sold their business to Canadian investors, and they call it Explosives Technology. Mm-hmm. And so I traveled internationally for several years.
What was that transition originally from Alaska to the West Coast, right?
Yeah, I went from Alaska, lived in Washington State for several years, and I was in the explosives business, but I was also working with that type art. And I worked that several years.
Mm-hmm. And so you kind of got in and out of the explosive business.
Yeah, that's
doing
right.
more
In and out.
And then Dupont transitioned.
Dupont. I was getting ready to do something else, and Dupont asked if I wanted to move to Wilmington, Delaware, and be part of their international group. So I did, and then I moved to Delaware, and I traveled into Southeast Asia. For several years.
Wow.
And there was 1 year I made 12 trips from Philadelphia to Hong Kong and Singapore and down that way. And it seemed like every time I got home, something would happen. I'd have to get back on the plane. And we ended up installing a couple of bulk factories over there in Hong Kong because they were building a new airport, and they were building a new power station. So there was a lot of explosives that were being used there, and we had a distributor there that called 𝗧𝗵𝗀, and they were an old trading house, a British trading house that came in there in the very early days, and their
British trading house. Yeah.
Yeah, their symbol was a poppy, and so they were
wow.
They were original trading opium for silk, and that's how far back they went. And they I think they called, if I remember right, the head was a Taipan. I think that's right. I don't know if that's the Japanese or the Chinese. Anyway, they had they had their big company in Hong Kong. They also had a place in Kowloon, which was on the Chinese mainland, but it was occupied by Portuguese, and they had a huge, I wouldn't call it a castle, but it was like that in Kowloon that the Taipan used to stay. And I was in and out doing work with 𝗧𝗵𝗀 for some time, and one weekend they asked me they said, "Would you like to go over and stay in Kowloon?" I said, "That would be nice." So I did. I went over there and stayed, and I was met at the gate,
of the castle,
of the home, the castle. I was met at the gate by elderly couple. He knew I was coming. I was the only one there. So they took me in, showed me my room, so on and so forth. And so I went in, and there was Kowloon had a lot of gambling. You could gamble there.
Isn't that where
A lot of
Macau
casinos.
is?
Macau.
Yeah.
This is Macau.
Okay.
Sorry, I said Kowloon, but I meant Macau.
Oh, okay.
I meant Macau. Thank you for correcting me.
No worries. I didn't even
So we
know.
were in Macau.
Okay.
We were in Macau, and so I left that night to go play some games at the gambling hall, and then I came back about whatever time it was, and I went in, laid down, took my clothes off, laid down. When I woke up the next morning, my shoes were all shined, my clothes had been picked up, washed, and pressed and put back down for me while I was asleep.
Someone came in your room and
Just
just
that couple came in, cleaned it all, signed my shoes, cleaned all my clothes, washed them, pressed them, put them back.
a little different than a logging camp in Alaska, huh?
Different than the cloud. Yeah, exactly, exactly. So that's the kind of way that people lived in those old days. It was interesting. It was interesting.
And so was Macau a big city?
Yeah.
It was already a big city
Yeah, it was
and
a big
already
city,
a
and
big gambling.
Yeah, big gambling den. Yeah.
So when you got that opportunity to travel and you were selling bulk and packaged
Yeah, I was
products,
selling technology basically, and explosives. Yeah.
how was that experience? No, there was no Google Translate.
Yeah, well, it was different. I mean, the first thing I did was I traveled around Southeast Asia, and Australia and New Zealand, selling explosives and installing bulk plants, and then that went well. So Dupont asked me to move to New Zealand because they wanted to start a plant in New Zealand. So they asked me to move to New Zealand, which I did. I was there for 2 years.
Wow.
But we never started a plant there because there wasn't enough business to support it. But they had been told that there was enough business there. And I went there and spent 2 years, and I came back to the Dupont corporate office, and I said, "You don't want to make that investment because there's not enough business." And so they did. So they decided not to. But at that time, Dupont was trying to reach out and be a more international company. And so they were trying to have manufacturing in various countries. And so they had chosen explosives to be the manufacturing in New Zealand, and it didn't work.
So you were doing like a 2-year-long feasibility study.
Well, and I was there to do the marketing, and there was a guy there. His name was can't think of it at the moment. He was there to build the plant.
So you were both there, but there
We
was
were both
nothing
there,
really to
and
do.
he was out scouting for plant sites and getting permits to build the plant. I've got a marketing group there that I inherited from the distributor, and I'm getting ready to market, and I keep looking, and I said, "Not here, not here," and finally, I had to go back to the corporate office and say, "We got to stop everything. We got to stop everything." And so I can't think of the guy's name that was there on the manufacturing side. I could see his face, and I told him, I said, "We're both going someplace else because the business is not here." And we both ended up going to Australia. So I became marketing manager in Australia, and he was
East or West Coast?
in Australia.
Yeah.
And I lived in Sydney.
Okay.
Yeah, I lived in North Sydney, and we had a couple of plants in Australia, and I traveled around Australia with the group. I was marketing manager for Australasia for 4 years, and then came back to the U.S.
Was the mining in Papua New Guinea, was that starting around
No,
that time?
it had just started. Yeah, it had just started. But I wasn't. We weren't involved in that. We tried to get involved, but we missed 𝗕𝗹𝘀𝗁 got involved in that Papua New Guinea business big time. But we didn't. We had some business in Indonesia, and we had some business over there, but we didn't get into it.
What were some of the other places in Southeast Asia? You said Singapore. Did that have to do with the port there, or?
Yeah, well, it was both the explosives and Taipar in those days, and so I was doing both. There was explosives business, uh, not a lot, but some. Hong Kong was a lot of business in Hong Kong. Explosives were, because there was big quarries there, and so on and so forth. Singapore, not so much. Actually, I think of name. Sorry, I can't think of Tom's Hemlock. Tom.
Jenkins?
What?
Jenkins?
Yeah, Jenkins.
Yeah.
Yeah, his dad was there. His dad was there as a salesman in that area. He was in that area for some time. So I would go in and check in with him, see what was happening. Wasn't much happening. And then went from there. And then I came back to the U.S. I was in the coal fields in Kentucky for several years, and then I went into international again, and traveled around international before in the last part. Yeah,
Any good stories from,
international.
yeah, from trying to work in Hong Kong and the culture
Well,
shock there, or?
yeah, no, yeah, there were a few. When I was in Borneo, Weyerhaeuser was having trouble with their blasting,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd had worked with Weyerhaeuser before in the logging industry, so they asked me if I would go in there and help them get their blasting squared away. And what they were doing, there were limestone outcrops around, and that's where they got their rock. And they would go in and they'd drill holes around on the limestone. They'd fill it with explosives, and then they'd just shoot it, and the rock would go everywhere. So they wanted to train some of these native people to do a little bit of delay blasting, and we were going to do it with primer cord, which was okay. And so I went in there, and I'm trying to teach them how to just simply do some very simple delays, so we could keep the rock in the pit
In the pit.
instead of out in the woods. And it wasn't going well, because there was a communication, one thing another. And so after a couple of days, I was in the cookhouse one morning, and the superintendent came by and he said, "How's it going, Walt?" I said, "Well, we're struggling a little bit." Well, he said, "Don't worry." He said, "Don't go up on the hill today." He said, "I'll meet you here in an hour or so. I'm going to show you something." So I waited for him, and so we're going up along the road, going up to the operations. There was usually there were a lot of piles of rock that would sit in there, maybe 2 or 3 yards of rock sitting alongside the road, all coned up, and there would be every once in a while there'd be that pile that's going up there. I thought they had placed that there for topping on the road when they needed it.
Mm-hmm.
So we went up the road and we stopped at one of these piles. And we got out of the pile and out of the truck, and he said, "Come on, I want to show you something." So we got out and we went through a little trail, and we went down, and then we got there, and there's a little camp of natives that's sitting there. They had a little lean-to. They were in there cooking their little fire. They had a fire going up against a limestone face, and when the limestone would get hot, they'd throw water on it, and it would break off. They'd take that, they'd break it up with a hammer, they'd put it in baskets, they'd take it out to the road, and they'd put it in a pile. And Weyerhaeuser would pay them $2.50 a yard for that rock. And he said, "This is how these people that you're trying to train, this is where they're coming from.
They're making their money
They're
by
making their
sending
money."
it into the
Yeah,
woods.
yeah. He said it cost me $3.50 a yard to shoot it up on the hill, but I can't get enough of this $2.50 rock. They can't get enough. So we're trying to train these guys that were working, with a fire, to do sophisticated blasting. You're going from that to that.
And
Pretty hard to do.
there's motive for them to keep blasting.
No, not so much.
No? Okay.
That wasn't a motive, because they would work.
Didn't matter to them.
It didn't matter. What didn't matter to them. There was no other way, for them. And so yeah, that was interesting. And then The other thing that a couple of stories, and when I was traveling internationally, was that when 9/11 happened, I was in North Africa, in Mauritania,
Oh wow.
and Mauritania has one major iron mine. It's way on the other side of the country,
Lots
across the Sahara Desert.
Lots of people ride that train.
Yeah, trying to go up there, and so I was out there at that mine when 9/11 hit, and I was talking to the mine manager, and we were going to meet for lunch at the hotel where I was staying. So I went back to the hotel. As I got to the hotel, I looked in, and they could you could see the television was on. Of course, they had satellite, and the fire was going and everything, and the locals were saying, New York, because they knew I was American.
Mm-hmm.
I said, New York looks like a volcano to me, and it was the first tower burning. And while we were standing there looking at it, the plane came into the second, and then of course, it was all kinds of chaos, and then the problem was, how am I going to get out?
Mm-hmm.
Because the mine decided that they weren't going to fly and anybody, and the train was once a week, and that was a 2-day train ride, which I'd taken before, and so he said, tell you, there's a fellow here that's got a Land Rover, and he can get you back to 𝗧𝗵𝗲, where there's an airport if you want. And he said, I'll introduce you to him. So I did, and I talked to him, and we made a deal, and he's going to take me back to 𝗧𝗵𝗲, which is now we're talking about leaving like around 3:00 in the afternoon.
Okay.
I'd say by the time we got going, it was probably 3:00 in the afternoon. So we're driving all through that day and all through the night
Just desert.
across the desert, the Sahara Desert. We got to 𝗧𝗵𝗲 the next morning around 8, 9 o'clock, and the sun came up. We're still driving, and we got there. How he knew where we were going, I never knew, because the big sand dunes would come here and there, and every once in a while we would come to a few little huts that were there, and it was almost like it was a crossroads,
Uh-huh.
and he'd come in there and turn and go off. And
He did.
it was, it was just there, just popped up out of the desert. And he would put his prayer rug out, the driver.
Mm-hmm.
He had another fellow with him. He'd put his prayer rug out every once in a while and say his prayer.
Pull over on the
Mecca.
side of the
Yeah.
not road.
No,
There's
no,
road.
just there. You're just in the sand. No road. You're just in the sand.
And he'd
he'd put-
face the rug in a different direction.
Exactly. And he'd say his prayer, and I'd say my prayers also. And then we got back to 𝗧𝗵𝗲, and I was able. They were flying. I was able to get a flight from 𝗧𝗵𝗲 to Casablanca, and if I got to Casablanca, I thought I could get to Europe, because they were flying on that part of the country, and they weren't flying to the U.S. But they were flying there. So I got to 𝗧𝗵𝗲, got to the airport, got a ticket, and then as I'm trying to get to the plane, the local police stopped me, and they say, you can't leave the country with cash. That's illegal. I said, oh yeah, okay. So I got all the cash I had and gave it to them,
I get the
which
message.
allowed me to get on the plane.
Bakshish. Yep.
Got on the plane, got to Casablanca. I think I stayed a night in Casablanca, maybe 2, and I was able to get to Frankfurt, Germany, and then I waited there for several days before I could fly from there back to the U.S., back to Philadelphia.
Wow.
And then as I'm trying to get out of Germany to go, of course they got all the people lined up going out, and everything is super attention to what's happening. And so I've got in my briefcase all kinds of explosive material, how to make explosives, plants, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And so I decided, and in my passport I'm from North Africa, Casablanca, Egypt, Turkey, all these places that you shouldn't be going if you're an explosives guy.
Right.
And so I've got all that. So when I know that they're going to search my bag. So I just go up. I tell them I'm in the explosives. That raised all kinds of.
I
So
can imagine the
it took a
flag.
while. I finally got on the plane, but it took a while. So that was an interesting day. Interesting several days.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And th- when you were, what about what about when your DuPont was being sold? What was that experience like? Because everyone talks about DuPont. There's that name is all over the place, right? And that
Right.
the glory days, almost.
Right.
What was that experience like, or were you kind of removed from that because you were off in international doing some other things, or was that still a big staple, or how did that affect
No, that was
you?
at that time. I was in the U.S. I was in charge of the Western United States for DuPont at that time, and they sold the business to a couple of investors from Canada, and off we went. Thinking, oh, everything's going to be fine. So some of the people retired that were around. Some of the people, and then off we go. So the investors, they were taking. Can't remember the number, but a lot of money out of the business every week, and that's what they wanted. And so there wasn't that much money in it. And so after a while, they started laying people off, and we had to downsize everything. And that was not a fun time, because what their expectations of the explosives business and what it actually was were two different things. And so it was a lot of people. We had to lay a lot of people off, and it was not a pleasant time. We ended up with a slimmed down version of DuPont.
Mhm.
And we, in the end, we were successful, but it was painful.
Mhm.
It was painful it was painful for the old guard, if you will, because they weren't used to not having a lot of money behind. And when the suppliers weren't being paid, they didn't understand that. And I'd been in Alaska. I had my own company in Alaska before I went to work for DuPont, and I knew what it took to go to the bank to get a loan to pay on the receivables, to pay the employees and so on and so forth. So it didn't bother me that that's the way we were operating at PTI, but it bothered a lot of other people, and so there was a lot of fear going on of what was going to happen, and as a consequence, it wasn't as successful in the first few years as it probably.
What would you say, like, kind of as a final part of this interview, what would you say was, like, looking back on your career there at DuPont, was one of the more impactful, let's say, lessons that you learned?
Well, I think I was telling this to the other night, talking about. I think the thing that impressed me was that when I went to work for DuPont in the explosives business, my intention was to be there a year, not any longer. But once I got into the explosives business, I loved it. I loved all about it. I loved the ability to load holes and direct rock to where it was going, and so on and so forth. And you're either in the explosives business, you either love it and you're in it forever, or you don't like it at all and you get out and you do something. And so I had a great career in explosives, and I loved every minute of it. And it was all because you were doing things with rock and with explosives that other people couldn't do.
Mhm. Yeah, it definitely seems like everyone in this business really.
That's right. You either love it or you're not in it. That's just the way it is. And even when I retired, I went back to work as a consultant in explosives. I had my own auction business that I was doing at the time, but I was still doing consulting. So I like to come up and just sit with the blasters and so on. It just gets part of your blood.
Right.
It's just what you are. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Great interview, and I'm sure you probably even got some more stories for another day.
I'll think about it. Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Blast Report podcast. I want to thank the team at Blast Think for producing this show, and please follow along for more episodes in the future, and share this podcast with your colleagues so we can continue to honor our industry and the people in it. Be safe and have a blast.